what we're going to be talking about today, we're having a discussion pretty much about what it says on the tin. Creative professionals don't often have an easy, open route for sharing their knowledge with educational institutions. That sharing tends to happen, but only when educational institutions reach out in the other direction. And as a creative professional, I've always been very eager to share my experiences with people who are not yet in the workforce, because I know how valuable that is. But it only tends to happen when someone reaches out to me, and usually that's through personal connections that already exist. And with the number of creative professionals that we have and the number of people who are going through programs and entering the professional creative fields, I feel there should be more of a connection there. And I really wanted to get this discussion started with two people who have a lot more experience than I do from the academic side, so we can really start to dig in here. So please welcome Joanna and Pam, and I'll let each of them say a little bit about themselves. Joanna.
Hi, I'm Joanna. I am the founder and the CEO of a tech company called Little Riot, and we make technology that aims to be more human, so we connect you with people you love when you can't be with them. I started my business, it was originally my university project, went viral on the internet, so I started my business off the back of that. Over the last, the business is like 11 years old now, so I've been able to get a little bit of time back, and over the last few years I've done some other bits of work, including designing a master's course for Glasgow School of Art.
Pam?
I'm Pam Bowman. I work at Sheffield Hallam University. I manage the visual communication courses, which is graphic design and illustration, and a foundation year. And we're about to add 2 new higher degree apprenticeships, which is a whole other way of working with design industry. I've been teaching for 25 years, so I've seen a lot of graduates in that time.
So as you can see, Pam and Joanna are very, very experienced, both professionally and academically. And my background as well, I'm a creative director, designer, and a photographer. And I've been doing that for over 25 years. And I actually come from the exact opposite side, because I did not go, I'm entirely self-taught, which essentially means reading a lot of books that people much smarter than me wrote before I came along. So I have actually learned in a very academic way, but self-driven and through a lot of practice. But in my professional career, I've been lucky enough to be asked to be a guest lecturer and come speak to a lot of people at institutions, but also I get to hear from a lot of either recent graduates who are trying to figure out their way in professional industries creatively, or people who are in programs and about to graduate and not sure what their next step should be. And more and more in the last 5 to 10 years from people who are trying to decide which degree programs to take when they're even younger, and they're trying to decide whether it's even valuable for them to take that or to try and learn themselves. So there are a lot of questions that I get asked, and as a way to kind of get this conversation started, I thought I'd ask the two of you if you have a favorite example of how students or academic programs that you've been involved with have benefited from the involvement of people with industry experience, especially if you have personal stories from when you were a student as well.
Do you want to go?
I guess the first one that springs to mind is probably when I was a student. So I studied interaction design, which was a sort of a hybrid between design and the creative side of things, but also computer science. So the idea was that we could design things, but also build them and prototype them. And yeah, I mean, we were probably a couple of years into the course before they started bringing in industry people, but I remember the first time somebody came in to speak to us, and I guess it was the first time as a student I'd been able to think about how my work might translate to the real world. And it was like, whoa.
So was it hearing about real world experience that actually made you connect that between whatever projects you've been working on that were probably mostly theoretical or at that point, right?
Because when you're a kid, you're at school and you're told study hard, work hard, do well in your exams, go to university, do well at university, get a job. And when you're like, I don't know, 18, 19, you actually, I mean, I didn't anyway have any like real world experience. I didn't understand how all these things I was learning could be applied to the real world. And it wasn't until, I guess, somebody from industry came in and even showed us examples of projects they'd done in the real world that I thought, right, this is actually how this is how, user research translates to speaking to real customers. This is how a design process works when you are actually building something real.
How about you, Pam?
Well, I think one of the important things about creative industries is that it operates a lot on personal connections, on knowing people, on building your networks. And for students, that's really important, to start building that network while they're at university and with their peer group, because they're the ones who they'll continue through their career with, and the students that went before them. But there's lots of different types of people that come in and speak at universities. I think universities have changed a lot in that the focus on employability is really important. So people come in and do one-off talks. Alumni come back all the time and share their experiences. And as well, universities do employ quite a lot of practitioners on associate lecturer contracts, so they'll come in perhaps regularly a day a week. So at the moment on my graphics course, I have Craig Oldham teaches a day a week, and Andy Stevens from Graphic Thought Facility, because he's from Sheffield and he comes back and has a link with the university. Lots of our staff are also practitioners, so I think there's an inbuilt link to the industry that's there all the time, but bringing people back who are working all day, every day in industry is really important, especially alumni that you have that connection with.
I feel like we see that a lot with alumni, which makes sense, right? Because their professors, their tutors know and often stay in touch. I'm sure you do with many of your students. So you know when they have interesting stories to tell and you can bring them back in. And I think that tends to be the predominant way that people are pulled back in to share their knowledge and experience, which is wonderful. But I often find a lot of professionals who either have my experience where I was self-taught and you've learned practically, but you don't have that personal connection with an institution. And for background, I started working and learning about graphic design when I was 16. So I was very, very early. There was no university program I could take at 16 about that. And by the time I was university age, the programs I could take, I already felt I was well beyond, but they were just not interesting. I couldn't test out of Introduction to Graphic Design, even though I felt at that point I could teach it. So it was very difficult for me to make connections when I was younger with institutions. And it probably took about 10 years of me working. So I mean, I still would have only been in my mid-20s before I started getting asked to come and speak, because by that point I'd made enough connections myself, but they still felt very random, and there wasn't a way for me to reach out in the other direction, even though I wanted to teach. I've always loved sharing what I know. And I grew up in South Florida, Miami area, and University of Miami has an amazing program. FAU has an amazing program. There are 3 or 4 really good universities for creative industries in the South Florida area. And I could not figure out how to get in touch with them and who to speak to. And it was, especially back then, it was even more difficult than it might be now. But I still feel like there's a barrier of just knowledge and understanding. Who do we reach out to? How does someone in a professional creative position, whether it's an individual, a sole proprietor, or someone who's working at an agency, how do we provide our services to an academic institution? Is there an easy way, or if there isn't, how could that be made easier?
I think my experience of the creative industries, both as a student and running a master's course, is that I feel like there are sort of 2 camps of people. There are the people that want to forge their own way, the people that either start businesses, go freelance, go out and sort of try and make their mark in the world in their own way. And then you also get the people who would just go and get a job, like that's a bad thing, but you get people that pursue a more traditional career path and maybe go and work at an agency and sort of work their way up. And I feel like the people that forge their own way are often more seen because they have to promote themselves as part of their work. They have to be noisier. And I think those people tend to get invited back just because they have the visibility and because courses can look to those people as good examples. And I feel like there's a bit of a shortage of people who have taken equally admirable paths, just in a very different way, who have maybe worked their way up to a very senior level in an agency or a creative role somewhere, and are earning very good money and are very good at what they do and are experts in their field, but because they are sort of absorbed within an organisation, they sort of aren't seen in the same way. So I think it's an interesting question: is how do we find those people? Because I feel like their stories are just as interesting as the people who are shouting about what they're doing on social media.
I think you're right. The way to connect with the university isn't that obvious. All universities will have a phone number on there, but essentially it's directed at undergraduates and applicants. I would say the best way is to get in touch with course leaders. Usually on a university website, a course leader will be named with contact details, and they'll be the people closest to the students and knowing, space and time when people can be involved with courses. But I think as well that very often it's, like you said, it's not about the superstars. It's about the people that students see as closer to them, more recent graduates, and in fields that aren't necessarily directly related with the courses. Because if you study graphic design and go on and be a client-side manager, that's a highly skilled, really important profession and part of creative industries, and that's definitely valued within degree courses. So I think for people to know that we would like those other skills to be visible to the students, and for them to see that there are so many different career paths within creative disciplines.
I wonder if there's, from both of your experience, are there ways that the institutions themselves could make it more obvious that kind of input is wanted, not just for alumni, but I think that could actually be really valuable to teach as part of the program and say, hey, once you've been out in the workforce for a few years, we'd love to have you back. We don't want to wait until you've made a name for yourself or you're 10, 15 years down the line. But I think especially for people who aren't alumni, who, whether they're working in agencies, big organizations, I have a very strong opinion that big organizations like ad agencies should be very proactive about this, because they can be, where often it can be more difficult for freelancers. But in programs like, or fields like illustration or filmmaking or photography, most people are freelancers and will happily share their experiences when asked, but they have to be asked. And I have this sense, I know personally that I would do it. I would reach out to a lot more organizations if I felt it was easy to. But whenever I've tried, it's just been, either I've reached the wrong person and they don't know who I should speak to, or it's very difficult, even just looking at a university's website, to find who that course program leader might be or who that course leader might be. And I wonder if there's a way that we could use professional organizations, or associations rather. Like in the US we have AIGA, there are organizations and associations throughout the UK that exist as well, but there doesn't feel like there's a history of this kind of connection of giving back. And again, what would you like to see maybe from that side? What would help you in your position for either agencies or these associations to do? What could they do to actually be proactive?
I think the first step is that we need to make it easier for that to happen. We need to make it obvious on the front page of the website who you can contact to offer that time. There are a lot of small organisations within creative industries. There isn't so much a representative bodies. There are things like Creative UK, which are really useful for lobbying for creative industries and how important they are to the economy. And they do have, they are looking at education, but it's not so much to create that network. There are organisations that are much, much smaller, like there's one called Not Only But Also, that celebrates other things, not the graphic designer, not the illustrator, but all those other roles. Things like D&AD are quite big and very well known, certainly within education and within industry, but essentially known for running competitions and not so much for being involved with university courses. There's a lot of space to do more things.
Because I'm thinking about some direct connections that I've seen in my own experience. You mentioned competitions that D&AD run. I don't actually know if they have any kind of student category in those. I'm assuming they do.
Yeah, they run a whole section of student awards.
Which would be a very good a good thing to build on top of, since they already have some connection. Because I know there are a few photography awards, for instance, that I've been on the jury for, and almost all of them have some sort of student category. And some of them are just looking for student entries, and there's no further feedback beyond that. But some of the bigger ones are very good about, like, at least inviting the finalists in person, paying for them and their tutors to come in to actually give direct feedback, portfolio reviews and things, which feels like the right kind of step, because then that information is not just going to the student, it's not being emailed, they're not just getting an award, they're actually getting a little bit of time with their tutors to then bring back to their program. And it's like that's a little sliver of an example of how an outside organization can actually be proactive in that way. But I wonder, do you think that the reason that doesn't happen as much is something that has to do with a lack of encouragement or openness by the institutions, the academic institutions themselves, or is it more about the professional associations and these agencies should they just be trying harder? Where does the fault lie, basically?
Somewhere in between, or a little bit of both.
It's interesting that we're framing this conversation in a sort of like, what can the professionals do? And I think it's really interesting that we feel that onus is on us to approach the universities or the education sector to give back. I mean, maybe I'm just a bad person, but it would never cross my mind to think, oh, I'm going to go and look for a university to go to and share my experience with. But if they reach out to me, I'm like, yeah, sure. Well,
I think that's a shared experience for every professional that I know. If we're asked, we leap at the opportunity to share. But it requires someone, a teacher, a professor, who is already tasked with too many responsibilities and doesn't have enough time and doesn't have enough resources to make an extra step. And that's kind of why I've broached the subject in that way, is that what could we do, and maybe not individuals, but especially agencies, companies that could have a policy, industry associations that could have a policy or that be making those connections and then encouraging individual professionals.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to foster a sort of narrative shift towards seeing it almost as like some sort of social responsibility, or don't want to say charitable work, but we're all inclined to give to charity, to do good, to do those things, and we do go out of our way to do those things and to give to those situations. So the question is, how do we...
We all know, when we're in the creative professions, we know that the common story is recent graduates are difficult to hire a lot of the time because they don't have the professional real-world experience that we need. And that comes up over and over and over again, but it doesn't happen often in non-creative industries. But I don't want to say non-creative, that's the wrong way of framing it, but let's take engineering as an example. There will be a paid year of industry as part of the program. There's a lot of active job placement afterwards, and the programs tend to be focused on creating hireable students. Not that creative programs aren't, but so many creative professionals are freelancers that it's not just about creating people who can be hired. Not every role can be hired for, but also not every role can be taught outside of a practical environment too. You mentioned like anyone from account managers to project managers. There are a lot of positions like that you could teach. You could teach the theory, but unless they've had experience working at an agency, seeing those processes actually in place, dealing with the politics of clients and the agency hierarchy, you can't hire a position like that straight out of university.
No, it's a really difficult thing. A lot of degree courses have sandwich years, but getting year-long paid placements in creative industries is pretty much unheard of. Sometimes shorter ones are possible. I think as well, we offer a sort of self-employed year out, which comes with support from the university for managing that self-employment and learning about tax and self-promotion and all those other things that you have to learn as a freelancer. So that's a really good way of dealing with it. But generally speaking, the numbers of students that go out on sandwich courses, into creative disciplines is much, much fewer because the placements aren't there. And creative industries are built of predominantly lots and lots of small to medium-sized enterprises who can't support students on placements, but maybe they could do projects with a year group or a small group of students within a university setting. So you can bring the outside in rather than sending students out.
At GSA, we were a big fan of a live brief, where we would get an organisation or a company to come in, ideally with a real problem. And we did some really interesting stuff, like we had a Norwegian company that made defibrillators come in and say, how do we make it easier for people to use a defibrillator in a situation where it is needed? And I think just giving students the opportunity to work on a real world problem, to get real industry feedback, was so beneficial to them, and to have really senior members of that organisation come in to look at the students' work, and also the benefit of having those projects in their portfolio when they graduate gives them a much broader range of skills, and also I think more confidence.
That's a really interesting concept there, because that goes beyond just bringing people in to give a guest lecture on Zoom or in person, right? That's actual collaboration, and I know it does happen, but it doesn't seem to be as common as it could be, right? And it depends on the program as well. If it's a product design related program, or especially a master's or a PhD level program, you see a lot more. Well, I've seen a lot more of those connections.
I think it does happen. I think it happens quite a lot, but it's not seen anywhere, because where would you expect to see the results of things like that? So in every year group of all of our courses, we have some kind of live project experience, sometimes multiple ones. But that's a brilliant student experience and a really good staff experience and a good experience for the people that come in. But there's nowhere to promote that work so that you generate more interest.
So that sounds to me like putting my branding and marketing hat on. That's something the universities should be promoting then, just to champion that. Yeah. And I know there are so many stories of universities promote. We were speaking earlier about how your university program uses you and your career as a way to promote their program, even though you weren't necessarily aware of it.
I graduated over 10 years ago, and my university project had gone viral on the internet, which is why I started my business. And they've used me in all their marketing material, all their posters, the prospectus for 10 years. And it was only last year that they asked me back to speak to the students.
So there is a bit of a disconnect, I think, with getting the word out, and even having a clear line of communication with graduates. And obviously that's not on creative professionals, that's on the institutions themselves. And I do really think it is a bit of give and take that's required. And a lot of it for me is that historically it doesn't seem like this has been a problem that's been solved in a way that everyone agrees on. So every institution deals with it their own way. Sometimes it's just down to the tutors themselves, not even the programs. And I feel like that's something that could be made better if there was enough of a movement to change it.
It shouldn't be difficult, should it?
No, it shouldn't be.
It's
We're all creative problem solvers.
It's probably a resource issue, right? Because surely all it should take is a member of staff to phone all the graduates in that year up 2 years after they graduate and say, hey, what are you up to? Oh, I work at so-and-so now. Cool. Do you want to come back and speak to the students?
Well, I wonder, you mentioned, I know you were involved with the Glasgow School of Arts program, and that you just mentioned that there were collaborative projects as part of that program. Was that part of what you helped design into that program, or was that something that the GSA already did? How did it come about?
I think they did a little bit of it, but one of the things I was really conscious of going into the course was producing graduates that had real-world skills and were either employable or understood enough about industry to stand on their own 2 feet, to work freelance, to support projects, to start their own businesses if they want to. And I felt like a lot of graduates coming out of other courses and out of previous years were just very academic, and they were very good at researching. And that's fine if they wanted to go and do a PhD or work in a research role. But then some of the students were doing quite good projects, and then were getting a bit of industry interest and they just had no understanding of, you know, business models, or not even as deep as business models, just basics into like how they might test it in the real world. So I was just quite conscious of wanting I basically was trying to produce people that I might want to hire. Not me personally, but like the industry as a whole. I was like, how can I scale these people up as much as possible across as many things as possible? Sort of like you were saying, and not just be a really good like graphic designer, but also, you know, have an understanding of what it might take to be an account manager, or like whatever role they see fit within whatever they want to do.
Well, you do see, I think it's important to have that perspective sometimes as well. Like, who would I want to hire? And what do they need and what are they missing? Which sometimes happens. I think it happens if the people running programs tend to have industry experience already, because and you have industry experience. Not all tutors have industry experience. Some have just gone through academic programs, which is also fine, but there's this risk of missing information, and I think that's where this gap that I put in the title of this session comes from, is that a big pattern that I've seen when I get questions from students or recent graduates is they become very aware of what they don't know, and usually they become aware of it when trying to get hired somewhere, because they don't really have a CV. They just have maybe some personal projects. A lot of students will freelance while they're going through their programs. So they have a little bit of a portfolio, but usually their portfolios are also made up of the projects they did while they were students. So they're not actual client projects. And agencies or clients are aware of that. It's very easy to see, okay, well, yes, you've done that, but you didn't actually get paid to do that, or it didn't have to perform in the real world. And again, some of this, I think, is on professionals, because if there were a facility to hire interns as paid interns, which obviously doesn't happen enough, it's usually the opposite in creative industries. You have a lot of unpaid internships, which I think is incredibly irresponsible, especially from big agencies. But if there was that facility to allow people to get that real-world experience, it would really help. But I wonder, in your program in Sheffield, what have you been doing and that shows you positive results in this way? What have you seen that has worked really well that you'd like to see in other institutions?
The self-employment support is really, really good, but building in that professional experience, work-based projects and work-related projects all the way through every year group has been so important, and it's just changed. The university has a focus on applying knowledge. You know, it's shifted the way that courses think and the way that courses work. And the graduate outcomes survey will be, and already is, a driver for courses to really focus on employability and making sure that students know that they are highly skilled, and that when they go out into the world and pursue their career, even though creative careers wind around like crazy, they're portfolio careers. It's a very different world. But all those skills that they have are really important. They're not basic careers, they're complicated.
Now let's talk a little bit more about this graduate survey, because I think that's not something a lot of people know about. I didn't know about it before we started talking ahead of this session. and not just for the people sitting here, but also for anyone who's going to be watching this later online. This is going to be a big driver, or it already is a big driver, for funding for programs and for students, correct?
At the moment, it's not being used like that, but it certainly is likely to be. And it affects universities' rankings and course rankings when they're compared. So it is really important. And it's really important that when students are paying their fees, that they come out with a career that enables them to earn a decent living. So, the graduate outcome survey happens 18 months after graduation and basically asks graduates if they consider their role to be highly skilled, how much they're paid, and there's some more qualitative information that's gathered as well about, the value of what they do. And so it's really important that we make sure that students are in the position to graduate and genuinely feel that about what they do.
I feel like you've just given a really good example of why that's important for university programs to concentrate on, but it's also almost equally important for any creative company that is in a position to hire recent graduates to be really concerned about too, because that first 12 to 18 months, if it's going to make that much of an impact at that 18-month mark, if you've been hired by an agency, you're going to have a much better opinion of yourself probably at that 18-month mark than if you've just been struggling to find work, which happens to a lot of people who are not recent graduates.
Yeah.
Right? Creative industries, especially for freelancers, can be a struggle, and I wonder, is there anything that you feel that professionals could be doing to actually help the institutions with that, like that post-graduation process? Because at that point, it's kind of out of the university's hands and completely on the world of commerce and sometimes professional agencies and individuals, but also just the market. I mean, I'm asking that kind of personally as well, because I'm not sure I know the answer. I have a lot of ideas, but like, what could I be doing, for instance, as someone who has been working as a creative professional for over 25 years? I've got a lot of experience running my own agency, being a freelancer as well, and I like sharing that information, but it's always when I'm asked, essentially.
Yeah.
Are there things that people like me could be doing to kind of help and encourage recent graduates so that they feel highly skilled, so that they understand how important what they do is?
There are quite a lot of mentor programs. I've seen probably 3 or 4 in the last couple of weeks that have been promoted on LinkedIn that are national things, where you can offer your time as a mentor to recent graduates. Because you're right, they are out of the hands of the university, although since the pandemic, a lot of universities have been supporting students for much, much longer. We don't shut the door. They're still our babies.
That's encouraging information. How about you, Joanna?
I was going to say the same as you. I think probably one of the most powerful things we can do is mentor people. And I think it's funny because the people that are most important, not the people that are most important, but like you said, if you go into work for an agency and you work with them, you probably feel quite good about yourself. Whereas if you've graduated and gone freelance, you're probably a bit unsure about yourself. If you're only 18 months in, you're kind of like, do I feel highly skilled? And those are the people that probably fall between the cracks a bit in terms of support or even self-confidence. So I feel like those are the people, we are those people, and we can support those people. But I guess the flip side of that is, I don't know about you, but I feel quite a lot of imposter syndrome when when I'm mentoring younger people, which is funny because, yeah.
I think that's a very common feeling.
Yeah.
I get asked a lot by individuals to mentor, and I only have so much time. So I mean, it's one of the awkward things for me is if I get a chance to speak to a classroom or to give a talk that's going to be filmed and presented online or anything that will reach the highest number of people possible, I tend to prioritize that because it feels like the best use of my time. I would love to be a full-time mentor, but you just can't practically do that. But I also don't. I know there are organizations that connect mentors with students who are recent graduates, but I'm not personally connected with any of them because I think they have a similar problem where...
Yeah, like I don't know about you, but who are they?
Yeah, exactly.
What are the organizations? Where do I find them?
So maybe this is another kind of like secret weapon that the industry has, but it's not being, somehow it's being underutilized. I wonder how... This is a question we might not have an answer for on this session, but I'm curious about how I could connect more with organizations that are providing mentorships, and whether it is to help them, because maybe it's just that they need help. Like I think a lot of academic institutions need help with branding and marketing and communications, and I think a lot of mentor organizations might need the same, and industry associations as well. And that's also part of this conversation that probably goes outside of our particular umbrella today. But again, we're all creative problem solvers. None of these things are difficult to solve if they have the right attention. So when they aren't solved, it tells me that they aren't getting the attention that they deserve. And then that becomes the first problem that needs to be solved. I'm just putting that out into the ether. There isn't a particular question there. What it leads me to, though, is something I think is almost a setup to all of this, which is, especially now with all of the resources that are available online, especially YouTube as an educational source, and then others like Skillshare and their other like teaching platforms, more and more people are discovering creative opportunities and industries and their skill sets at a lot younger age, well before they would be thinking about university. But there's not a lot of support for them. A lot of parents might not understand that this is kind of something viable for a 14 or 15-year-old to be studying and learning about, even though we know that it is. How can we, again, professionally and academically, help kind of encourage and support and spread the word about the creative industries, plural, being a viable career path for people who are in their teens?
I think even before that, I think, when you're 10, maybe you need that.
Of course.
And I guess one of the easiest answers is that everybody in creative industries who's a parent who has a kid in school, go to the school, go and support the school, and talk to kids about the career options that are available, because creative industries aren't necessarily valued in the same way as science or maths or other more academic subjects are valued. And sometimes that really needs to be promoted as a decision. We know that art and design isn't promoted in schools as much as it had been in the past, and that would certainly help, seeing that you could be somebody working in the games industry, and that's quite exciting for young children, but it doesn't occur to them that that's a career choice, an active choice to do that.
Do you think it's something that would carry more weight if higher education institutions were to help facilitate that, to go to schools and actually bring, maybe bridge this exact gap, but with the higher education institutions bringing professionals in, but also bringing university students into like those younger levels of education, rather than, because if I reach out to how do I reach out to a primary school and say, I'd love to come give a talk because I live in the area? I mean, I can, but that almost seems like it could be creepy and dodgy, and there are loads of privacy and child protection issues that we need to be aware of too. Whereas maybe a larger institution could actually help be that connector. Is any of that happening at all already?
That does happen, but it probably tends to happen a little bit too late. It tends to happen at the point of making decisions about which A-levels you're studying. Yes. And by then, you've made the call, and it's very difficult to move areas in our education system, at least, because you choose a route and you're kind of on it then.
Yeah.
I think one of the most powerful things people can see is someone who's just a little bit ahead of them. Because when I was at university, we would get a lot of people that would come in that were, people in their 40s and their 50s, and when you're 21, that's that seems too far removed from where you are. Whereas someone that's only 3-4 years out of university, you're like, okay, I can see how I can get there and I can be like that person. So I think when it comes to, like, I've spoken in schools and I find I can't really connect with, teenagers because I'm standing there telling them that I run a tech business and, I was a troublemaker at school too and maybe you'll be okay. But I'm too far removed from them now. Whereas I think probably at primary school age, the most powerful thing to bring in to that age group is probably, like the 14, 15-year-olds that are like making all the money on YouTube, or like the gamers on Twitch that are like making more money than their parents. I feel like the world is changing, and if you are a creative person, there are so many ways now to earn a living and so many careers available to you that for schools, I think it could be seeing that sort of stuff that they think is cool and that they can see could be them. And I think it's always a case of showing people someone that's just a few years ahead of where they are.
And it sounds like it's a combination of the schools in that case offering the opportunity and being open to it in the first place. Because again, I don't expect that 15, 16-year-olds are going to be thinking about going and speaking to 10, 11-year-olds. That's not even going to occur to them. Yeah. But it also equally wouldn't necessarily occur to a lot of teachers in those roles to ask someone, because there is a massive disconnect, I think, too. A lot of parents don't understand how their children can be earning a living in their mid-teens. I was very lucky that I started doing that when no one was doing it, but not through YouTube or social media or anything like that. It was just, I realized that you could get paid for graphic design, and so then word of mouth kind of helped from there, but it was completely by accident. There was very little support for it. Very luckily, my parents didn't think it was crazy, but that's luck. Yeah. That's not kind of in any sort of intentional process. And I remember at the time the friction that I felt being someone in their teens, being a professional. No one understood it then. So I actually have a lot of empathy for kids who are doing it now when it is a thing. It is clearly very viable, and yet there's still a lot of friction. So maybe this is, again, a bigger question for everyone who's listening here and also watching this later to kind of ponder and solve. It's a problem that can be solved, but I think a lot of it is in acceptance and understanding and just having this conversation more. Before we wrap up here, and we will have a few minutes for questions from anyone in the audience, it's always good to end with an action item. What do you feel, what would you like to see, each of you, in the next, say, 12 months? What would you like to see change? What do you think you could change from both the professional side and the academic side to start allowing more of these things to happen, to make the environment better, to make the connections better?
I've been thinking quite a lot about how creative industries connect with the university anyway, because of a project that I'm doing as part of my role. But actually, the route to connect to the university is very sort of business focused. It kind of suggests quite a big commitment from whoever contacts the university, and so I think there needs to be a route for a simpler, a lighter touch connection, maybe, that's more direct. But in the meantime, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm always happy to connect with everybody.
I think purely as a immediate solution, I think it would be good to see some sort of central resource, almost like a marketplace, where if you're aware of it and you're an industry professional and you're interested in giving back, you can put up a bio, put up what you do, say you're available, half a day a month, whatever your time commitment is, and then universities and course leaders can view that resource and say, oh, cool, now I have a huge pool of people to choose from.
I wonder if that's something that actually LinkedIn might be the organization to do that, because they already have all of these people there. But that could be amazing if anyone from LinkedIn is watching this. This is your next product idea. But I know from my own personal experience, again, being outside of academic institutions, what I've tried to do is always, as much as possible, try to hire people who are students. I even did that when I was in my mid-20s. I I remember partnering with someone who was a fantastic designer, but he was still doing his degree. And I loved what he was doing, and I thought, I don't need to look for someone with 5, 10 years of experience, even though by that point I was 25, 26 and had 10 years of experience. I just wanted people who were eager and hungry. And I've always kind of found that to be a very good way to measure finding new talent. And I actually did that when I was, as one more idea to kind of plant for immediate action for people who are listening. When I was creative director at Moo, the business card company based in London, I hired a number of freelancers who were university students, which was not something that they had ever done inside the company. And it was, I initially received some pushback only because they felt it was strange, rather than hiring freelancers who were done with their degree. And what I was able to do was find people who had some time on their hands during the summer, needed a job in that position, but were already showing a lot of promise and a lot of really good work in their early portfolio. And they provided an amazing amount of work, and we paid them a fair wage, which they were thrilled to get because they weren't getting it from anyone else. And at least one of those ended up being a full-time employee afterwards, because that seed had been planted and that relationship with a company and the team had been built. So I think there are things that people in professional organizations who have the ability to even just hire someone for a few hours of freelance work, that can change someone's career in a huge way. So I think that's a great place for us to stop. And before we open it up to some questions, I just want to thank Pam and Joanna again for your time, and for everyone who's listening in person and online. Thank you very much for paying attention. Thunderous applause, as you can hear. You can add that in post. So we do have time for a couple of questions, if there are any. I also have a few prepared here. You, sir. You look like you would have a question for us. No? Well, I know we've got to change over, but I do have one question I think I could ask to the two of you. We touched on it briefly earlier, but a lot of the time it is people who are leaders or seen as leaders in creative industries who are asked to come in and speak. But as you said, there's often a disconnect there between those people, even if it's just based on age or the length of time that it's been since they graduated from a program. Things change. How can we just make it more accepted to bring people in who have maybe graduated 2-3 years ago and have some experience, just specifically to talk about that experience to people who are about to graduate? I think that does happen a lot, but it won't be seen externally as much. Universities will bring in big names and they'll promote those talks so that everybody can see that we're bringing in these big names, but all the time people that are more recently graduated, because they're less intimidating and you can relate to what they've done, and they feel, what they've done feels kind of attainable for the students.
I mean, yeah, it happened when I was a student. It is quite a common thing that happens a lot, because, I mean, we touched on it earlier. It's usually the lecturers that have those personal relationships still with the students that then can, drop them a message on LinkedIn and say, can you come back and chat to the students? And it's usually a bit more informal and sort of less intimidating for the students and also for the graduates. So I think it is something that happens quite a lot, but as we also discussed, quite often in the creative industries, after a year or two, you might, especially if you're freelance, you might not have done very much at that point.
Well, I guess the lesson there for anyone listening, if you are a recent graduate, you have a lot of valuable information to partake, and if you haven't been asked by your tutors to come back and speak, maybe reach out to them. And that probably goes for anyone, regardless of the amount of time you've been working in industry and outside of university. So I think that's a great place to stop. Thank you both again. Thank you for everyone here and watching online. And we hope this is the start of a productive conversation.